У нас нет точных сведений, что произошло.
We can't say for sure what happened. We think we should at least wait for the UN inspectors to give their report. We don't have any evidence showing that it was the regular army of the Syrian government that used those chemicals. We don't even know at this point if those were chemical weapons or just some hazardous chemicals. Besides, as I said elsewhere, we think it would be totally absurd for the regular government forces to use banned chemical weapons in a situation where they've encircled the so-called rebels in certain areas and basically are about to finish them off. They're fully aware of the fact that such a step would mean sanctions, including even the use of military force. This is just absurd. It doesn't make any sense. That's the first point. Second, we think that if someone has evidence proving that chemical weapons have been used and that it was the regular army that used them, they should present this evidence to the UN Security Council, to the inspectors and to the Security Council. And this evidence has to be compelling. It should not just be hearsay, just some conversations intercepted by the intelligence service. Even in the US, some experts think the evidence presented by the administration is not compelling. It is possible that the opposition staged a provocation in order to give their patrons an excuse for a military intervention. The videos you're referring to of children who had allegedly been killed in this chemical attack are just horrific. However, the question is, who did it? What exactly was done? And whose fault was it? Those videos don't answer these questions. There's an opinion that this compilation was made by a group of militants who, as both the US administration and we know, are associated with Al-Qaeda. We also know that they have always been notoriously ruthless. Still, I'd like to point out that there are no parents, women or medical personnel in those pictures, which you would have noticed at a closer look. Who are those people, and what really happened there? This question remains open. Certainly, those pictures are just hideous, but they don't prove anyone guilty. This incident obviously has to be investigated. We would like to know who was responsible for these atrocities.
What would Russia's position be if you became convinced that it was by the government of Syria? Would you agree to military action?
I don't rule this out, but let me draw your attention to one absolutely essential thing. Under international law, the only body that can authorize using weapons against a sovereign state is the UN Security Council. Any other reasons and methods to justify the use of force against an independent and sovereign state are unacceptable, and they can be seen as nothing but aggression.
I see your reasoning in this regard, but I do wonder when there's a question mark about who committed these crimes, whether Russia should distance itself from the Assad government and maybe hold up its shipments of arms or something like that.
We will not come up with a response unless we get the exact information on who committed these crimes. Speculating and rushing to promise we will do a certain thing would be totally wrong. We don't do that in politics. But let me assure you that we will take a compelling stand, as we firmly believe that the use of weapons of mass destruction is a crime. But there's also another question. If there is evidence that it's the militants that have been using WMD, what will the US do to them? What will these sponsors do? Will they stop weapon supplies? Will they start hostilities against the militants?
Well, I think John Kerry said that anyone who stands by when these crimes are done will have to answer to history. And I am sure you and Russia would be included in that, and the United States. But are you afraid that you may be seen today as standing by a regime that's oppressing and committing crimes? Is there a danger that you will be seen as a protector of this government?
We're not defending the current Syrian government. We're defending other things entirely. We're defending the principles and norms of international law. We're defending the current world order. We're defending the rule that even a possibility of using force must be discussed within the framework of existing world order and international law. This is what we're defending. This is the absolute value. When decisions concerning the use of force are made outside the UN and the Security Council, it raises a concern that such illegal actions could be taken against any country under any pretext. You've just said that Mr. Kerry believes that it was Assad's forces that used chemical weapons, but the Secretary of State in Mr. Bush's administration was trying to convince the international community that Iraq had chemical weapons in a similar fashion. He even showed us a test tube with white powder in it. The argument turned out to be invalid, but a military operation was conducted based on it, a military operation many in the US now call a mistake. Have we forgotten that? Are we proceeding from the assumption that new mistakes are so easy to avoid? I assure you, it is not so. Everyone remembers what happens, and they take it into account when making their decisions.
So I understand that you will not accept the evidence that has been offered so far as convincing. What would it take to convince you?
Нас убедит глубокая.
We would be convinced by detailed investigation and by direct evidence of who exactly used chemical weapons and what substances were used. Then we'll be ready to take decisive and serious action.
Mr. Putin, is Russia still fulfilling weapon contracts signed with Syria?
Yes, of course. We're doing this because we believe we're working with the legitimate government and we're violating neither international law nor our obligations. The UN has not imposed any restrictions on the export of weapons to Syria. We feel so bad that Syrian militants have been receiving weapons without any restrictions from the very first day of this conflict, despite the fact that it is against international law to supply weapons to the country in the state of military conflict.
I would like to clarify the situation with the state-of-the-art S-300 missile systems.
Go ahead.
There's been so much speculation around this. Has Russia actually delivered the S-300 to Syria or not?
The S-300 are not the newest systems, though they might be a little better than Patriot missiles. But we do have S-400 and S-500 coming up soon. These are certainly very efficient weapons. We have a contract to supply S-300 missiles, and we've already supplied some parts, but not all of it, because we decided to suspend supplies for a while. But if we see international law being violated, we will reconsider our future actions, including supplies of such sensitive weapons to certain regions of the world.
Many national leaders made it very clear that their countries would in absolutely no way become engaged in this crisis. Would you also make a similar statement?
I'd like you to note that presently there are no Russian armed forces units stationed anywhere outside of our country. The only exceptions are the 2 military bases on the territory of the former Soviet Union and our peacekeepers in operations within the UN mandates. This is something really good, something we're happy about. We're certainly not planning to, and we will not get engaged in any sorts of conflicts. As far as the decision made by a number of nations not to participate in the military operation, frankly, I was quite surprised by it. I had believed that the Western society has been long acting under the principle of certain uniformity, similar to decisions that had been taken at rallies of the Soviet Communist Party. But it proved not to be the case. Indeed, there are individuals who treasure their sovereignty, who analyze the situation, and who have the guts to take decisions in the interests of their own countries and to defend their stance. This is a good thing, which says that the world is truly growing stronger in its multipolarity.
Mr. Putin, what place do you think the Syrian conflict will have on the G20 summit agenda? The summit is in St. Petersburg and is just around the corner.
First of all, I'd like to say that the agenda for the upcoming G20 summit has been drawn up well in advance. We've discussed it with our partners, and we don't think we have the right to go back on our agreement. The G20 summit will mainly focus on the world economy and economic problems, such as slow economic growth, unemployment, corruption, tax crimes and management. But considering the grave situation in Syria and that we can't agree on what is to be done to resolve this extremely important issue, we could probably take advantage of the fact that the leaders of the 20 leading economies in the world will be meeting in St. Petersburg and spend some time discussing this topic. We will not impose it, though. We can just propose to deviate from the agreed agenda and discuss the Syrian conflict. I want to stress this again. We are hosting the summit, and that means following certain rules. The agenda has been agreed on beforehand, and we don't believe we have the right to single-handedly modify it. However, I will certainly propose to my colleagues to discuss the situation in Syria. I hope my counterparts will agree.